Hi everyone, I am Jeff Lawton. I'm going to look at a game from the third round of the FIDE Candidates Tournament taking place in Moscow at the moment, and it's between Liren and Fabiano Caruana. So these are the two pre-tournament favourites on rating. Coming into the game, Ding's had a sort of disastrous start. He's lost twice. This is the man who's had a 100-game unbeaten streak not long ago against top players. But he managed to lose. He lost in the first round to Wang Hao, where he basically overlooked. He played one bad move in an endgame, and then he also lost yesterday, the day before, to MVL of France, which again it was just totally unrecognisable. Hard to know what was happening really. Whereas Fabi drew in the first round, and then he beat the wild card Alexienko in the second round. So it's all to play for. And Ding had the white pieces. He opened d4 and d5, c4. We've got a queen's gambit, a Slav defense, c6, knight f3, knight f6, and now knight c3. So there's no holding back. He's going down the main lines. D takes c4 and a4. And bishop f5. So this is the proper Slav, because black's developed his bishop outside the pawn chain. Knight e5, e6, and now f3. So the idea is to play e4 with a strong pawn center. So bishop to b4. Now this shows that Caruana's not afraid of e4, because then there's a lot of theory that goes roughly. I'll just quickly run through it. Bishop e4, fe4, knight e4, and now the idea of queen h4 and also to take here. Then white plays bishop d2, breaking that pin. After queen d4, this is a line that was played, knight e4, queen e4, queen e2. This line was played many years ago. I remember a lot of games by Kramnik. Well, I guess this is now considered okay for black after bishop d2, king d2, queen d4, king c2, and it's a sort of complicated position where I assume the current state of play is that black's okay because Caruana's willing to go into it. But instead of that, Ding played knight takes c4 after some thought. So we had castles from Fabi, and now king f2. Again here, if you try and play e4, and this time it runs into knight e4, which you must take with a pawn because there's a pin, and then queen h4 check would be fine for black, as it turns out, because if you play, you can't play g3 because of check, forking the king and the rook, and if you play, you can't play. Of course, you can't play king e2 because you're dropping your queen to check. If you play king d2, black can go queen e4. So he's got 2 pawns for the piece, but the king, as you can see here, it can't move anywhere, and so that you can't protect the d4 pawn. And after something like queen f3, queen d4, black's doing very well in this position. So e4 is not possible. And Ding played king f2. Now the idea of that this time is to play e4. But then Fabi played e5. And the main line, which was actually a new move, and the main line is to play this, but he played e5. So now this is a really sort of critical moment already. Here's Ding, he's on 0 out of 2, and he's facing one of the tournament leaders and pre-tournament favourite, Caruana, and he's faced with clearly some opening preparation. If he wanted to play safe, he probably would play something like this and try and swap the queens off. But true to himself, he sort of decided to take on Caruana's preparation, and he played knight takes e5. And now Caruana showed the first point behind his idea. So the first point is if we take this, Then queen d4 check, e3, queen e5, and this should be quite comfortable for black, and the king's a bit not too happy on f2 really, to put it mildly. So Ding played queen d2 instead, which maintains the queen's protection of d4, but no, this is already a very strange looking position with a bishop sitting on c2, which is not quite on pre, but it will be soon. So now we had c5, and excuse me, Caruana's still blitzing these moves out, of course, where Ding's having to think about his replies. And after a lot of thought, he played the critical line, but it's a really brave move to play to. Well, the whole idea of just not playing d5 earlier, he's actually just going down his opponent's analysis. And I guess Ding just likes to do that. That's his style. Is that maybe he thinks, well, I won't get the line again, or he doesn't believe in the line that black's doing, maybe, and he wants to see what's actually happening. But also it shows great faith in his ability to calculate, even when he's faced with Leela and Stockfish and whatever else Fabi's used to prepare the line. So now we had bishop to b3, again is being blitzed out so far by Caruana, and now e4. There was another interesting move, another bizarre move, was bishop to e4. When you can't take that, because then bishop takes knight. Well, if you play either pawn takes or queen takes, then knight e4 wins the queen. If you move the queen, say, well, here to try and protect your knight, it obviously doesn't work because of takes. Knight g4 forks the king and the queen anyway. But after bishop e4, white probably just plays the queen back instead, and now he's threatening to take on e4, and after something like queen e7, knight c4, takes, bishop d5, white seems able to safely play e4, and the worst is over for white, because once you get to sort of e4 f3 structure and black can't safely sacrifice, then white's doing okay. The knight is on a great square, and he's got the bishop pair as well. So we had bishop to b3 in the game, and now e4, which is the only move really, because you need to safeguard d5, and then rook e8. And Ferrugia, with the young chess star, 16-year-old chess star, was commentating on the game along with Magnus Carlsen, and he said straight away here that queen f4 was forced, which is an interesting comment. But yeah, that one of the lines goes that if white retreats the knight to d3, it's a sort of sensational move, rook e4 here. And now if white, well, you have to capture that really, otherwise position's being blown apart in the center. But then after bishop takes c3, again we can't. We're just basically in trouble here, because whatever we take with, then knight e4 check. So you would have to move the queen, but then after bishop d4 check, king e1. So white's actually the exchange up, but his king's in a mess here. We can't, by the way, play bishop e3, because then bishop takes c3 is good. You can't take that with the queen because of knight g4 running into the forking the king and queen. And if you play queen takes, then black can take another. Sorry, I meant to do, if you play king takes, then black can do bishop d5, and it gets another pawn for the exchange, and the king's in a right mess here. You can't play that, of course. Excuse me, because of knight d5. Yet again, another fork of the king and queen. So after this possibility, rook e4, we can then play instead of fe4. Sorry, we've got to play fe4 at the beginning, and then bishop c3, Queen f4, so going back down this line, instead of bishop e3, king e1. But then knight d7, and black simply got a fantastic attack here in return for the exchange, and the king's just stuck in the centre. So it's not advisable for white to try this. So queen f4, as Alireza said, it seems to be forced. And now we had c4 again. Caruana's just blitzing this out. He still had 1 minute 40 on the clock, whereas Ding's having to work everything out over the board. And he played knight takes c4, and now knight d7. So by this point, we're only on move 15. White's Fabiano was an hour ahead on the clock, and I think so. That means that Ding had about 40 minutes left for the next 24 moves. So he first played bishop to e3 and knight f8. Again, Caruana played that straight away. So it seems crazy, doesn't it, that we've got this. E5 was a theoretical novelty. Was it back on move 8 or 9? And yet still now, sort of almost 10 moves later, Caruana's actually prepared the whole thing. He's actually had this position, and no doubt countless others that may have occurred in his pre-game prep. So Ding played bishop d4 and knight g6, hitting the queen. And now we had queen f5. So he's sort of, what Ding would like to do is to be able to bring his queen back, to where it's sort of not so boxed in as it would be on the king's side as in the game. But the immediate problem is, again, there's knight takes e4. It's our old friend, the idea of the knight fork here. You could try and give up the queen, but it doesn't seem to work out. So, and after fe4, rook e4, black has now given up a piece, but the immediate threat is to play queen check, and then, or bishop c4 rather, and then queen h4 check and take on d4. For example, if you try a move like, there doesn't seem to be an answer for white to this, and if you try something like rook e1, and you run into rook f4 check, king g1, bishop c4, which you must take back, and now queen c7 hits the bishop, and white basically can't get out of this. For example, if you play your bishop back, then it runs into rook d4. The point is that queen d4, we've got bishop c5 winning the queen. And if instead white plays g3 to try and prevent queen h4 check, and this time we've got bishop c4, rook c8 with a sort of a similar idea, because if you move the bishop, again it's the same pattern. We pin on the diagonal and pick the queen up. So then white would have to, instead of that, you could try knight e4, but after bishop d2, knight d2, black can play rook c4, among other things really, and this resulting position should be better for black because of the exposed king. You're forking these two minor pieces. You can't protect both, neither can move to protect the other, so you have to do something like bishop a7, and after queen c4, black's doing fine because of the exposed white king. So instead of this, Ding played queen f5, so he's unable to retreat the queen back. And now we had bishop c4. So I think this was the first actual think that Caruana had in the game. So it's possible that with queen f5 that Ding's at last managed to take Fabi beyond, at least beyond his memory anyway of what he'd prepared. So now we had bishop c4, queen c7, hitting the bishop again, and now bishop e2. So what white wants to do is he wants to be able to play his queen, wants to get the queen out of this area really and bring the queen back to either e3 or d2 if possible, where it can help to consolidate. So we had bishop c5, so that's to weaken white's control of the dark squares. And now we had bishop c5 check, and we had queen c5. But Caruana actually had his first reasonable, like medium-sized think at this point, because he's the big alternative, and his very critical alternative in the whole game, was to play rook e5. And it's a little bit unclear why he turned this move down. When you compare what happened in the game to the positions that result from this, it's not ever so clear why he chose queen c5. Perhaps that's being super critical, really, because it's a mega complicated position. But that forces the queen back to h3, only square. And then black could play knight f4, hitting the queen. And now you've got a choice of queen h4 or queen g3. If you play queen h4, then he can't have been afraid of this, because then g5, well, it's a bit similar to the other line actually, but then after queen g3, knight h5, queen g4, queen c5. This is if white tries to hang on to the queen, by the way. And after queen c5, king f1, rook d8. The idea of rook d8 is to stop the queen escaping to d7. And basically the queen here is boxed in, it can't free itself. And so black's got a fantastic attack here, and the evaluation is good for black. You can't free the queen. For example, you can't play here, trying to move the knight, and because then knight f6, and the queen's got no square. Similarly, you can't play h4. You're just actually weakening yourself, and after h6. Basically still got the same problems, and white doesn't have a way to bring his pieces out, and as I say, the queen's totally boxed in. For example, rook d1, we can play f5, ef5. ef5 is forced because the queen doesn't have a square. The knight's covering this square, the knight's covering that square, and after ef5, knight e2, just an example of what can happen to white here if he tries to keep the queen. Knight e2, rook e2, king takes e2, and now queen c2 check. So rook d2 doesn't work, because then simply rook e8, and we're winning the rook on d2. If white tries to run with the king, there's rook e8, and if you keep running, then king d4, queen b2 check. For example, if king d3, we've got queen e2 check, king d4, queen e3 forces king to c4, and as well, one nice finish is now rook c8, king b4, otherwise queen c5 is mate. And okay, one finish is to play a5 check, king takes a5, and queen c5 mate. So it would be difficult for white to try and hang on to the queen with queen h4, but perhaps you can play queen h4 wanting to sack the queen with g5 for black, but it doesn't seem to offer any more than this line, queen g3. And now after knight h5, first thing to say is if you take here, king f1, it's not so good, because then the queen clearly just comes back. So what black is doing is keeps attacking the queen, so that before it can retreat down this diagonal, because the king's in the way. So this is what Fabi would have been considering. But the line that seems to be best for white is bishop to d4. Well, I think it's forced actually, with or without queen h4, g5, queen g3. And then after knight g3, taking the queen, hg3, knight e2, bishop e5, queen e5, and now knight takes e2, and then we'd reach this position. But it's hard, it's a little bit confusing why Caruana chose the game position compared to this one, because he probably would have calculated this. Because after f5, which white can't keep his pawn center together. For example, ef5, we just simply take on d5, and you would think if anyone's got winning chances, it's black with the queen, and certainly this is not a winning position for white. And again, knight e4, trying to hold the centre doesn't work because of fe4. When you've probably got to take with the knight, allowing the pawn to drop. If you play fe4, that's a disaster because of rook f8. But anyway, like I say, Fabi thought about it and declined to play rook e5. He played this instead. He may simply have thought this was a good line for black. King f1, and now h6. And now we had, so the idea of h6 is that's to cut off the queen's, the idea of the queen coming back into consolidate this route. So we had h6, and now rook to d1, bringing another piece into the game. And now queen b6. And then we had rook d2, queen e3, hitting the rook, and now rook c2, protecting everything. So it's a very nice maneuver. And the first point is that black is unable to play this because of elegant reply knight d1, which hits does two things. It hits the queen and also hits the rook, which is only defended once and it's attacked twice. So that would win for white. So we had a6, but this it somehow doesn't make a good impression. It looks like that black's drifting a bit, and it's the game is starting to turn against him. So now queen h3, and now there's the idea is to play here and bring the queen back, drive black's queen out, and then white can consolidate with the two extra pawns. So we had b5. Excuse me a moment. Sorry, and then queen g3, continuing the plan to bring the queen back. b4, knight d1, excuse me, queen to b3, coming to pick up the a pawn, but now then the queen's going to be out of play, and white's starting to consolidate here. Rook d2, sort of very elegant manoeuvring by Ding, to and froing with the rook. Makes a nice impression. Queen a4, and now queen to f2. So the queen's now, if white can just play moves like this and in a dream world and bring the rook out, then everything's great in white's world here, and the two pawns will easily win the game. And the 2v1 here is not really going to trouble white, and the two knights are not doing a huge amount over here unless black can sacrifice something. So we had queen to d7, and now g3, sort of being decided he wants to put his king here and get it out of the way, then he can make room for the rook to enter the game. So no real choice for Fabi but to play check, king g1, and now a5. So now we've got about 8 moves left to the time control, but I think he had about 10 minutes left. Queen d4, knight h5, knight f2, driving the queen back. Queen to d7, and now again Ding's very principled. He plays f4, attacking the knight. So if knight f6, then white could just play e5, and black's going to get run over very shortly here because he's got to play knight h7, so the knight's now out of play, and after this, for example, and bringing the rook over, the game's at this level of chess, it's all over. So the only real try for black, which Caruana played, is knight takes f4, knight h takes f4, gf4, knight f4, and now king f1, another elegant move, making way for the rook. Queen d6, rook g1. So by this point, obviously it's Caruana's position has drifted. He's only got one pawn for the piece, and perhaps he's just playing on because just sort of inertia, or can't accept that the novelty hasn't worked out, or who knows, probably just hoping for a chance before the time control. So we had f6 to prevent the mate, and now bishop b5, activating his bishop. rook e7, and now b3, which nips a4 in the bud. So very good consolidating move. And we had rook f8, rook to c2, knight back to e6, we can't take because of the queen d4. But queen e3 now threatens the knight, which now finds a new home over on g5. Gets kicked back with h4, so there's nothing in knight e4 here. White can simply take it. So knight f7, rook to c6, queen b8, and again queen c5. So white's pieces are very well coordinated. The knight's protecting e4, which is why it seems to be the the key square in the position almost from the opening. And the knight, although the king hasn't got pawn cover, a knight next to a king does a really good job of defending it. But in any event, it's white that's attacking here really anyway. So we had queen d8, rook takes f6, king h8, and now rook f5. So now it's not even a piece for a pawn anymore. Rook c7, bishop c6 to block the rook. Black's pieces just can't get into the game anyway. So there's desperate lunge with a4, b takes a4, and now b3, trying to do something with the queen. But Ding very cool, he just plays rook g3, b2, rook b3 to come and round up the pawn. So we had knight d6, rook takes f8, queen f8, but of course as the pieces come off the board, the extra material makes itself even more felt in chess. So rook b2, and now queen f4, so black's got a bit of activity, but it's a hopeless position, of course. We had rook check, king h7, and again an elegant move, queen c2, sort of intending a discovery. So rook e7, e5, check along the diagonal. Knight f5 is forced, and now queen e4. So if you capture that, then knight e4, well, everything wins here, but certainly d6 makes it easy, followed by queening pushing the pawn through, and the bishop guards the bishop's guarding the knight, and the knight's guarding the pawn. So Fabi played queen c1, king g2, but we can see all this is very well protected by the knight. It stops you ever coming to h1 or trying to check anywhere. It's remarkable how a knight can cover a king. So g6 to keep the knight, and rook b3 sort of consolidating, and the game's just all over here. And in this position, Caruana resigned the game. So fantastic result for Ding, having lost 2 games in the early rounds where he was unrecognisable. He's now well and truly back in the tournament. If we look at the standings after the 3 rounds, so we've got the rest day today. Ding is now a point behind the 3 co-leaders, because Nepo drew in the 3rd round with black against Alexienko in a really interesting French winner, and MVL, I think that was a round where he drew against Shiri, and Wang drew with black. It's a difficult sort of ending. He drew with black against Krishuk. So we now have 3 co-leaders, and Ding now has reason to feel more optimistic. He's a point off the lead, and he's managed to peg Fabi back a bit. And for Fabi, that must be a heartbreaking loss in a way. I mean, it's only round 3, but a bit dramatic to say heartbreaking. But he did have all this preparation. He got his prep in, and yet still Ding just sat there and calculated his way through it, and managed to find a way through. And in the end, he played that move, queen f5. Which took Fabi out of his prep, and in the ending consolidated and outplayed him, even though short of time. So it was a really impressive game, one that was very enjoyable. So thanks for watching. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe. That would be a big help. Thanks very much. Bye.